3 minutes ago, the monarchy trembled. In a quiet but calculated whisper, Prince William confirmed what the palace had desperately tried to hide: a secret operation to remove Queen Camilla from the royal line. The implications are staggering. Not just for Camilla, but for the entire future of the crown. Who orchestrated it? Why now? And what's really at stake? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The moment this revelation slipped from William's lips, even if only behind partially closed doors, it ignited a silent explosion across the royal estate. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Advisors exchanged frantic glances. A tension settled over the palace like a heavy fog, signaling that a line had been crossed, one that could never be undone. The truth wasn't just whispered. It thundered beneath every marble corridor, threatening to expose the fractures the monarchy had spent years trying to conceal. Those closest to the heir sensed immediately that this wasn't a temporary flare of frustration. This was a decisive break, the kind of move someone makes only when they've run out of patience, out of excuses, and out of time. In the shadows beyond public view, secrecy became the palace's first instinct. Phones were immediately confiscated. Staff were handed thick stacks of NDAs and told to sign without question. Advisors were summoned into back-to-back briefings where the only rule was silence. Information flow was cut off so abruptly that even senior aides were left blind, relying only on whispers traded between trembling hands. The operation William referenced had clearly existed long before this moment, structured quietly, protected fiercely, and hidden from those who believed they were still part of the inner circle. Even insiders felt the walls closing in, realizing the future of the monarchy was shifting under their feet. The shockwaves only intensified when it became apparent why William's stance had hardened so drastically. For months, he had watched power struggles unfold behind the scenes, small, seemingly insignificant decisions that revealed Camilla's efforts to strengthen her influence within the royal framework. The subtle elevation of her allies, the quiet redirection of charity power, and the gradual reshaping of her public image all hinted at a long game no one fully recognized until it was too late. William had tried to remain neutral, tried to respect the delicate balance of his father's marriage and reign, but neutrality had a price, and he was no longer willing to pay it. Rumors had already been circulating that Camilla's position wasn't as stable as public appearances suggested. Tense exchanges during private meetings, awkward silences at family gatherings, and sudden unexplained absences all fed into a narrative few dared to articulate. Those whispers, once dismissed as noise, now carried alarming clarity. When, added to William's unexpected confirmation of a covert plan, it became clear that the tensions weren't imaginary, they were erupting, and the monarchy, already navigating shifting public loyalty and internal fatigue, felt the tremor of something far more dangerous, an internal rebellion fueled by legacy, loyalty, and fear of repeating a painful past. Behind closed doors, rushed meetings unfolded with the urgency of a nation preparing for a seismic political shift. Some argued for immediate damage control, others for total suppression. But nothing could suppress the truth that William's confirmation had already sparked. Every aide sensed that this was not merely a family dispute, it was a battle for the soul of the crown, one unfolding far from cameras yet destined to shape every headline to come. The monarchy had survived scandals, betrayals, and crises, but the potential removal of a queen consort was unprecedented. And everyone knew that once a plan like this surfaced, even in a whisper, it had already reached a point of no return. But to truly understand why Prince William would risk everything to push Camilla out, we must uncover the roots of the silent rebellion brewing behind closed palace doors. Not long after Queen Elizabeth's death, a whispered alliance was forged, not in public, but in private corridors where royal protocol is overshadowed by legacy and resentment. Prince William and Prince Harry, estranged, but momentarily united, are said to have formed a pact that stunned their inner circles. The meeting didn't happen in front of cameras, nor was it documented by official aides. It was quiet, urgent, and raw. Stripped of the public persona and diplomatic filters, the brothers faced one another not as working royals, but as sons. Sons of Diana, The unspoken wounds resurfaced instantly, carved by years of media storms, public betrayals, and Camilla's looming presence in their family's darkest chapters. For the first time in years, they found themselves not on opposite ends of the royal battlefield, but standing on the same side, united by a shared pain neither of them had ever truly processed aloud. William, known for restraint, reportedly said what many never expected to hear: "She's not our queen." The words didn't need context. Harry didn't challenge them. In fact, he sharpened them. "Don't let her do to the crown what she did to Mum." That sentence, loaded with decades of grief, left no room for denial. It was the point of ignition. From that moment, the truce was sealed not with ceremony, but with mutual fury. It wasn't about titles or jealousy. It was about a wound that had been dressed for the cameras but never healed in private. That moment lit a fire inside William that palace aides would later describe as both calculated and personal. What began as a quiet resolution turned into a strategy. Subtle at first, carefully timed leaks, a sudden reshuffling of media appearances. Stories about Camilla's rising control over royal decisions began to surface, but never traced back to William directly. Every move was deliberate, every silence louder than words. The narrative began to bend, not break, just enough to suggest that not everyone inside the palace was aligned behind the Queen Consort. While Harry distanced himself from royal life publicly, behind the scenes, he continued to support the operation in quiet but influential ways. He connected with foreign press, nudged conversations with former staffers, and reminded allies why the crown's legitimacy mattered more than its comfort. William, still firmly rooted within the institution, maneuvered the internal chessboard. The bond between the brothers wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. It was purposeful, and it had a target. Yet the brothers weren't alone in their vigilance. Beyond their pact, murmurs of discontent were already echoing within the palace's oldest rooms. Not everyone believed Camilla belonged at the heart of the monarchy, and not everyone was willing to watch silently as she carved her path toward uncontested power. The alliance between William and Harry was only the beginning, but the brothers weren't the only ones watching Camilla's rise with growing concern inside the palace. Powerful forces were preparing to act. Inside the royal machine, not everything is what it seems. A discreet council, senior courtiers, advisors, even a trusted Windsor cousin, allegedly formed what insiders now call the Shadow Circle. Their objective? Stop Camilla's consolidation of power before it was too late. It started quietly. Whispers exchanged behind closed doors, polite nods concealing a brewing storm. Princess Anne, long regarded as the monarchy's most duty-bound figure, was among the first to raise concerns not publicly, but through carefully worded dispatches and deliberate absences. She wasn't alone. A select few, deeply loyal to the late Queen Elizabeth's vision of tradition and restraint, grew increasingly alarmed by Camilla's unrelenting expansion of influence. One by one, they aligned not through confrontation, but through subtle coordination, and together they became the Shadow Circle. Their method was simple: observe, document, and prepare to strike with precision. Camilla's growing dominance wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Suddenly, royal charities that once fell under Anne's oversight were reassigned. Key events once shared by senior royals subtly tilted toward Camilla's calendar. Staff members known for their loyalty to the old order were quietly pushed out. It wasn't just strategy, it was control. And it moved with the kind of confidence that suggested she no longer feared pushback. That assumption, however, proved fatal. The circle took note of everything, every switch in protocol, every name struck off a list. Every moment Camilla extended her reach became a new line in the file they were building against. Her. Then came the leak. "She's not fit to lead." Read the line scrawled across a document that found its way to an insider journalist. Though no names were attached, the message was clear, and the tone was deliberate. It was the first public crack in Camilla's armor, and it sent a jolt through the press and the palace alike. Behind the scenes, the circle had already drafted contingency plans, reshuffling succession roles, recalibrating who would appear beside whom. preparing for a scenario where Camilla would no longer be viable as queen. This wasn't conjecture. It was structured, and it was serious. Crucially, the intelligence gathered by the circle didn't stay locked away. Through a series of carefully calculated intermediaries, key information was funneled to Prince William, not in official briefings, but in hushed, after-hours messages, files, reports, intercepted conversations. Each new revelation further hardened his resolve. This wasn't just about sentiment anymore. It was strategy, and it had allies. Camilla had unknowingly made herself the common enemy of those who valued legacy over reinvention. The Shadow Circle knew she was no longer just the queen consort. She had become a threat to the monarchy's balance. And so they moved. Discreet pressure applied to royal patrons, trusted aides reassigned to roles that neutralized Camilla's influence. Old alliances reawakened. In public, nothing seemed amiss. Camilla was being boxed in not with confrontation, but with cold, methodical precision. Yet, for all their secrecy, the circle still needed something more, something public, undeniable, and irreversible. And it was Camilla herself who would unknowingly deliver it. It was meant to be a private affair, a seemingly harmless charity gala speech, but one unsanctioned comment from Camilla about her evolving role as the monarch's partner ignited a firestorm. The queen consort had just overstepped her shadow and confirmed the worst fears of her enemies. She stood before a polished crowd of aristocrats, donors, and diplomats, confident and unscripted. As she spoke about the future, she drifted into territory no one had approved. Camilla referred to herself not merely as a supporter of the king, but as someone whose role within the monarchy was expanding into a more permanent stewardship. It was a sentence many didn't catch in the moment, but those who did knew exactly what it meant. It wasn't gratitude, it wasn't reverence, it was ambition, thinly veiled and dangerously timed. Within hours, that one phrase spread like wildfire, first among staff, then through back channels to senior royals, and finally into the headlines. And with it came panic. To the press, her words were a signal. Some painted her as boldly asserting herself in an outdated institution, but others, especially those loyal to the late Queen's legacy, saw something else. A power grab, an announcement of intent, a woman once seen as a consort now subtly framing herself as a ruler in her own right. The tabloids devoured it, and the court, already tense and fractured, responded with fury. Senior royals were blindsided. Meetings were called. Tempers flared. Princess Anne reportedly demanded to know who had approved the language. No one had, because Camilla hadn't asked. The fallout was swift. William, always composed in public, made no effort to hide his reaction during the following royal appearance. The warmth he'd once tolerated out of respect for his father was gone. In its place was distance, deliberate and damning. Camilla, once able to count on polite silence from William, now faced something far more dangerous, his visible contempt. That single glance, caught by photographers and dissected by analysts, carried more weight than any statement. It confirmed what many had suspected. He no longer saw her as part of the future. Behind the scenes, palace aides scrambled. Damage control became the new priority. Transcripts of the gala speech were edited. Video clips were pulled from official platforms. Requests to media outlets to contextualize her words were quietly pushed through under the guise of clarification. But the damage had already metastasized. The Shadow Circle had their proof. The phrase was printed, recorded, archived. Her enemies didn't need to twist her words, she had handed them the ammunition directly. What may have been a moment of unfiltered honesty for Camilla became a breaking point for the institution. It wasn't just what she said it was, that she said it without consensus, without caution, and without understanding the war already moving against her. That misstep didn't just reveal her aspirations, it exposed her political blind spot. The palace doesn't forgive ambition that breaks protocol, and from that moment forward, her presence wasn't just unwelcome, it was seen as dangerous. From here, the operation to remove her didn't just continue, it accelerated, and Camilla didn't see the storm brewing until it was far too late. Behind the gilded walls, King Charles faced an impossible decision. Defend the woman he waited a lifetime to be with, or protect the monarchy he was born to lead. His heart said one thing. The institution? Something else entirely. For a man who had sacrificed nearly everything to be with Camilla, his public image, his reputation, his decades-long marriage, this moment should have been unimaginable. But it had arrived, brutal and uncompromising. The pressure was immediate. William's stance was no longer speculative. It had become strategy, sharpened by alliances and backed by intelligence. And though Charles tried to dismiss the growing campaign against Camilla as exaggerated, the Toma whispers turned into warnings. Senior advisors, those who had once bowed to her presence, now spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "Your reign is at risk if you defend her too strongly," one reportedly told him. And for the first time, the king faltered. The tension between father and son could no longer be masked behind formal smiles and scripted interactions. In private, their exchanges grew sharp. William didn't plead. He demanded. He reminded Charles that the crown was not built on personal affection, but on the survival of the institution. And each time Charles pushed back, the chasm widened. The king, already a man torn between duty and desire, now found himself facing the one thing he had always tried to avoid, choosing between his son and his wife. He was no longer a symbol, he was a man unraveling. At public appearances, the strain showed. Observers noted how Charles's hands trembled slightly as he gripped his notes, how his voice cracked during ceremonial readings, how the public's opponent, light in his eyes, once fierce when standing beside Camilla, now seemed dimmed by uncertainty. Behind palace doors, aides reported long silences, broken only by deep sighs and sudden changes in schedule. He was spiraling inward, torn by a loyalty that no longer served the crown and a love that no longer served the people. And Camilla felt it. She wasn't blind to the shift. As press coverage soured and allies grew cold, she turned to Charles with urgent pleas. "Shut it down," she told him, voice shaking. "End this now before it ends me." But the king couldn't act. Every move he considered came with consequences. If he defended her publicly, he risked collapsing the delicate support holding his reign together. If he remained silent, he'd betray the very woman he fought so hard to crown. And as he hesitated, the tide continued to rise. William, sensing the vacuum of leadership, struck where it hurt most. Leveraging his growing influence, he quietly engaged with sympathetic figures in Parliament, those who had long questioned Camilla's legitimacy but had never dared speak. Now, emboldened by William's involvement and the shadow circle's evidence, they began whispering about constitutional boundaries and public opinion. A few suggested revisiting the language of the Royal Titles Act. Others hinted at the historical precedent of consort withdrawal. Charles heard every word, and still, he did nothing. He stood still, suspended between love and legacy, heartache and history. And while Charles wavered in silence, William made his boldest move, yet directly confronting the throne. He didn't need to shout. Prince William knew that power in the monarchy isn't taken with noise, it's taken with silence, structure, and lineage. In a masterstroke of palace politics, he enacted a silent coup that forced the monarchy into a reckoning. By the time Charles realized what was unfolding, William had already secured the key positions. While his father wrestled with emotion, William played the long game, quiet meetings behind closed doors with constitutional experts, discreet conversations with Parliament figures known for their loyalty to the institution over personalities, and above all, subtle nods to the Commonwealth allies, whose symbolic support could tip the balance. There were no ultimatums, no public declarations. Instead, he offered facts, precedents, risks, and perhaps most importantly, a clear path forward, one without Camilla at the center of the crown. He moved with precision, building his case like a chess player who never once needed to bluff. Behind the veil of ceremony, advisors began whispering about an internal review of the Royal Titles Act, one that would reopen the question of Camilla's formal standing. William never officially confirmed it, but he didn't need to. Just the suggestion of constitutional ambiguity was enough to stir debate. Historians were pulled in. Legal scholars offered quiet guidance. The monarchy, always rooted in tradition, was suddenly facing a legal and symbolic upheaval from within. The signs were subtle but unmistakable. On the royal website, Camilla's name began to fade from prominence. Event invitations once printed with "Their Majesties" quietly reverted to more ambiguous phrasing. In press releases, the term Queen Consort appeared less frequently, sometimes absent entirely. Insiders were instructed not to challenge the change, and when questioned, palace staff offered no clarification, just blank stares or polite redirects. These weren't oversights, they were signals. William wasn't just challenging Camilla's future, he was erasing her presence, one detail at a time. For every word not spoken publicly, another step was taken privately. Staff loyal to William were placed in key communication roles. Camilla's closest aides were reassigned or quietly encouraged to step aside. When the plan finally leaked to the media, it wasn't through accident, it was a calculated ignition. Headlines exploded. Is the Queen Consort being phased out? Royal shake-up behind closed doors. The press did what William never needed to do, ask the questions out loud, and when reporters pushed for a statement, William stayed silent. That silence, thunderous and deliberate, was the answer. In the absence of denial, speculation became truth, public opinion fractured, and Charles found himself increasingly cornered. What had started as internal containment had now become a constitutional conversation, one that placed Camilla's legitimacy on unstable ground. Her supporters scrambled for footing. Her enemies watched from the shadows, pleased. And through it all, William never wavered. He wasn't staging a rebellion, he was restoring order. In his mind, it wasn't personal. It was preservation. The monarchy had endured because it adapted, and this was simply its next evolution. Camilla, blindsided and betrayed, retreats from public view. But what she does next sends shockwaves through the palace. She had stayed silent for years, smiling through scorn and scandal. But now, facing a brutal erasure, Camilla decided to fight back. In a secret letter leaked to the press, she made an accusation that no one in the palace was prepared for. The letter, dated and signed in her own hand, wasn't sent through official channels. It appeared unceremoniously on the desk of a well-connected royal correspondent who published it within hours. In it, Camilla laid bare what she described as years of emotional manipulation, systemic exclusion, and betrayal from within. But the most explosive accusation was this: that the firm, under the influence of Prince William, had begun rewriting royal history to cast her as a usurper and Diana as a sacred martyr, weaponizing grief to serve a political end. "I was never allowed to belong," she wrote, "and now I'm being erased to preserve a lie." The letter detonated in the public sphere like a grenade. It didn't just strike back, it shifted the conversation. For the first time, Camilla's silence was shattered by fury. And in her words, there was a rawness that stirred discomfort even among her critics. She accused William of waging a campaign rooted not in duty, but in vengeance. She claimed meetings had been manipulated, statements suppressed, and that Charles, her husband, had been coerced into silence by threats cloaked as constitutional concern. But it was the line about Diana that turned whispers into roars. Some condemned her, calling the letter an act of desperation and disgrace. But others, especially within certain corners of the media, found sympathy. Not support for her role, but for her struggle. After all, hadn't she endured decades of hate, humiliation, and relentless scrutiny? Was it truly justice to remove her now, after she had finally reached the summit? Unexpectedly, Camilla gained allies. Not palace loyalists, but powerful media voices who relished the chance to expose the monarchy's undercurrents of cruelty. Editorials surfaced questioning the crown's treatment of its women, especially the inconvenient ones. Charles, already frayed by the pressure, could no longer mask the emotional toll. Reports described him as withdrawn, erratic, and overwhelmed. His health, once brushed off by staff as fatigue, now seemed to decline before their eyes. He cancelled appearances, missed briefings, and was seen clinging to Camilla in moments that blurred the line between public defiance and private grief. He hadn't spoken a word about the letter, but his silence screamed of torment. He was caught between a kingdom and a queen, and the weight was becoming too much. William, however, remained unmoved. The letter had been Camilla's last hand, and to him, it only proved how volatile her presence had become. The monarchy must move forward without her, he allegedly told aides. His resolve hadn't cracked. If anything, it solidified. He believed the monarchy wasn't just evolving, it was correcting a course that had gone too far off track. The public mess was regrettable, but necessary. He would bear the criticism, he would carry the blame, as long as the crown survived. But just when the war seemed at its peak, one unexpected royal figure emerged from the shadows, changing the game entirely. For years, she watched and waited, never seeking the spotlight. But now, Princess Anne speaks. And what she says about Camilla, Diana, and the integrity of the crown shocks even her closest confidants. Anne had always been the monarchy's iron spine, unyielding, duty-bound, and loyal to the institution above all else. While others courted press attention or retreated into comfort, Anne remained silent, working behind the scenes with a precision few noticed and fewer understood. But the chaos surrounding Camilla's standing, the whisper campaigns, the letter, the ficta, crumbling authority of Charles, it was all too much. Silence, Anne decided, had become a liability. And so, for the first time in decades, she stepped forward not with gossip, but with judgment. Her alliance with William, long suspected but never confirmed, became undeniable. She had been his silent anchor, his unflinching advisor. And now, she became his sword. In a rare address to the Privy Council, Anne's voice was sharp, unwavering. "The crown is not a charity," she declared, eyes locked on every stunned face in the chamber. "It's a responsibility, and we have failed it." She accused no one directly, but her words dripped with implication. Camilla's rise, she implied, had not been about service, it had been about status. And that distinction, Anne said, threatened the very foundation of everything the monarchy was built to preserve. This was not personal vendetta. This was correction. What struck most deeply, however, was when Anne invoked Diana. It was not done for sympathy or spectacle, it was done as remembrance. She spoke of nights spent listening to Diana cry, of moments when the late princess confessed her deepest fears, and of the chilling prophecy Diana once whispered in confidence. "They'll break me, and then they'll replace me." That line hung in the air like smoke. Anne's voice faltered for the briefest moment, not from weakness, but from rage barely concealed. She had carried that memory for years, and now, it demanded justice. Her speech did more than draw gasps, it shattered the palace's internal stalemate. In that moment, Anne made the unspoken speakable. "Remove her, or we all fall," she warned, not as a threat, but as a truth. And those in power listened. The Queen's only daughter, once thought to be quietly neutral, had drawn a hard line. Advisors who once hedged began to align. Nobles who had stayed quiet raised their hands. The tide turned not with fury, but with inevitability. Camilla's role was no longer a question of affection or image, it was now a matter of survival. The monarchy shifted that day, not publicly, not yet, but in corridors that had held centuries of silence. A verdict was forming. Camilla's name, once etched beside Charles in future plans, began to fade. And as Anne left that chamber, the message was clear. There would be no more indulgence, no more compromise. The crown, if it was to endure, had to be ruthless. And then, just when it seemed decided, a final twist emerged, one that will reshape the monarchy forever. In a secretive midnight session, the crown's legal advisors stamped a centuries-old seal onto a document few knew existed, the formal process of royal exclusion. For the first time in modern history, a queen consort would be officially removed from the line. But what happens next? May be even more dangerous. The plan had a name, whispered for weeks but never confirmed. Operation Marigold. And once that seal was pressed into the parchment, the final phase began. It was executed not with spectacle, but with solemn precision. Just a handful of senior officials, a sealed room within Windsor's most secure wing, and a legacy-altering decision inked into royal history. What had begun as quiet tension had now become institutional fact. Camilla's name would no longer appear in any line of royal succession, nor be associated with the future architecture of the crown. The monarchy had spoken, not with thunder but with finality. Shortly after, Prince William gathered a select group of royal staff and advisors, his tone clear and unwavering. "This is the crown's new beginning," he said. There was no room left for ambiguity. The monarchy would no longer orbit around personal history, emotional compromise, or unresolved guilt. It would move forward, streamlined, fortified, and in his words, unapologetically renewed. Within hours, the palace went into lockdown. A media blackout was enforced, and any leaks were to be met with immediate legal action. But the silence only amplified the suspense. Journalists sensed something monumental had occurred. They just didn't know what. Meanwhile, Camilla vanished from the royal schedule. Her name was stripped from engagements, her face removed from upcoming program guides, her office shuttered without explanation. Officially, it was termed a period of personal reflection, but everyone knew the truth. She hadn't stepped back, she had been pushed out. And as her allies scrambled for clarity, Charles finally broke his silence with a statement that shook the nation. It was short, deeply personal, and unmistakably pained. "This has been a time of personal pain, but I remain committed to my duty above all." It was an admission, a farewell, and a surrender. The public reaction was volcanic. Celebrations erupted in pockets of the kingdom, many framing it as long overdue justice for Diana, a restoration of royal order. But the other side of the divide flared just as fiercely. Protests formed outside Buckingham Palace, demanding transparency. Social media became a battleground of conspiracies, with some claiming Charles had been coerced, others insisting William had orchestrated a quiet coup. Polls split, voices clashed, and the monarchy, while technically more unified, now faced a dangerous undercurrent of division. The price of reform, it seemed, was trust, and it was already unraveling. No announcement, no clarification, no televised speech could undo what had been set in motion. Camilla was gone, but the echoes of her fall reverberated through every corner of the royal institution. The old guard had acted swiftly, but questions lingered. Questions the crown would not answer, because some truths, when buried deep enough, can protect a dynasty or destroy it. As dawn breaks over Windsor, one question remains. What price has the crown paid for peace? Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.